Okay, it's me again. One last short video. This will be shorter than the second one. I just wanted to talk a little bit about a crucial distinction that Mill makes when he's identifying the good of happiness, or the ultimate aim of happiness. For Mill, happiness is defined as pleasure and the avoidance of pain, but he makes a crucial distinction between types of pleasures. His critics, the critics of Mill's hedonism, said, look, if you're arguing that the highest good attainable by a human being is pleasure, then you might as well just be describing the life of a pig, of swine. Pigs live for pleasure. That's the highest good they can achieve, physical pleasure. But we live for something more. This is the voice of Mill's critics in the 19th century. Human life aims at higher ideals than pleasure. So in order to respond to that criticism, he made distinction between types of pleasure and argued that human beings pursue both lower, what he called lower, sort of physical pleasures, and higher pleasures, pleasures that require the cultivation of a mind and the cultivation of a taste in culture and art. And his argument was that the happy life was one that involved a balance of higher and lower pleasures with a preference for the higher, so that we have reason to delay gratification for some of our basic physical pleasures if it means cultivating our minds, developing our character in such a way that we can better appreciate some of the higher pleasures, like great art and great literature, great movies, great music. I mean, just to give a few examples. But also friendship, okay? Not just, so friendship is a higher pleasure in Mill's sense. It requires work. It requires, thought and care and attention. It's not just a momentary feeling of physical pleasure. That's not what friendship is about. And so Mill's idea is that, look, pleasure is the highest aim, the highest good, but human beings are capable of higher pleasures, and that's the key to happiness, right? Not just the pleasure of eating and sex and things like that, but the pleasure of reading and the pleasure of socializing with friends, and pleasures like that are really the key to happiness. Okay, so he develops that idea here. I'll go back to the slideshow. Here, I bring that out, this sort of idea that we have a preference for the higher pleasures. And so that in order to thrive as a human being, I have to be able to satisfy my desire for higher pleasures. He also acknowledges that pain is a part of life, right? There are many necessary pains. Among other things, the pain of putting off the gratification of simple, basic physical pleasures is needed for us to develop, right? Develop character traits that we desire. And for us to accomplish goals, we have to experience some pain. But there's many pains so that's necessary pain, but many pains are unnecessary. And so Mill does think that happiness is about minimizing unnecessary pain. That is one of our ultimate goods or highest goods, or that's something we value intrinsically, the minimization of unnecessary pain. But this idea that we have a preference for the higher pleasures, it's an interesting idea. Is it true? If you could, so this is a claim that Mill made in this context in utilitarianism. It is better to be a human being dissatisfied than a pig satisfied. Better to be Socrates, the ancient Greek philosopher, dissatisfied than a fool satisfied. That a human being thrives in an environment where she can cultivate her higher faculties, where she can demonstrate her ability to do things like write a book or read a book. And that in the absence of these capacities, while a human being might be satisfied at some level, her life won't be going well. And so it's better to sacrifice some physical pleasure for the sake of these higher goods than it is to just settle for a life of physical pleasure in which we can't experience any of the higher pleasures. It's better to be Socrates than a fool, even if that means introducing more pain into your life or delaying gratification of physical pleasures. I don't know if that's true, but you can think about that. So certainly Mill thought it was true, and Mill thought it was the way to defend his thesis of hedonism. That in striving for the life of pleasure, we are striving for the life of Socrates, the life of a fully developed human being, not the life of a pig or the life of a fool. Okay. Some of the attractions of hedonism, real quick. And this comes out in the chapter from Schaefer-Landau in his book, chapter 1. Well, look, if happiness is the good that we're seeking, there are many paths to happiness. And so by that, we mean there are many models of the good life, many ways of living the good life. So hedonism looks like a more democratic thesis, a less elitist approach to the good life. There are many ways of being happy, so there are many ways of living the good life. Hedonism also seems to give us some authority in determining what it means for our lives to go well. My happiness depends in part on what I desire and what I value and how I value it in relation to, the good of happiness. But everyone has different desires. Everyone has different, things that they like doing. And so what it means for our lives to go well is partly up to us, right? I determine the terms of my own happiness to some degree, or what it means for my life to be going well, depending upon what I desire, what I value. As long as we can show that those desires and those values either contribute in an instrumental way to happiness or themselves are pleasurable or happy-making activities. Okay. Other attractions, well, and this is a picture of Charlie Brown asking our question, what is happiness anyway? Right? Well, the hedonist is, as long as we have a kind of grip on what happiness is and we can define it well, it sort of fits our intuitions that misery is what lowers a person's quality of life, whereas happiness raises it. That's a kind of basic intuition we have, and hedonism explains it. We also have the intuition that happiness is the endpoint of our explanations for why we do things, that when we're explaining why we do things and why we value what we value, our explanations seem to bottom out in happiness. Happiness is also sort of what we desire for other people we care about. It's what we really want for them. So that suggests that it is the highest good. Okay, there are some arguments against hedonism that we can take up next time. I didn't really discuss these in class, but these are again from the chapter, I think, 2 in Schaefer-Landau. The one I did mention is this idea of evil pleasures. Oops. So we can think of pleasure as something that comes about as a result of good deeds or bad deeds. But if pleasure is the only intrinsic measure of the goodness of a life, then it shouldn't matter, according to the hedonist, whether I'm living a life of pleasure as a result of doing evil things or living a life of pleasure as a result of doing good things, from a moral point of view. That shouldn't make any difference. They are both equally good lives, right? According to the hedonist. They are both, in both cases, the person who is enjoying well-being because they have achieved the end of pleasure, just in different ways. But that seems like a problem. It seems intuitively we want to say that the person who is living a life of pleasure as a result of doing evil deeds is living a less good life, or they're not flourishing as much as they could. They're not thriving as a human being as much as they could. We want to say that, but it's not clear the hedonist has a way of explaining that. Okay, that's an example of a problem for hedonism, an argument against hedonism, a reason for rejecting the basic thesis. Something I want you to think about, like, are you a hedonist? Well, here are some arguments against the hedonist. Do you have a response? Do you have a way of replying to those arguments? Okay, so finally, Heathwood, the essay Faring Well and Getting What You Want. This is the essay that I've asked you to write about for homework. Well, his essay contains a kind of objection to hedonism because he wants to argue that something can only make my life better if it's something that I genuinely desire. And if we can imagine someone who doesn't genuinely desire their own happiness or doesn't genuinely desire pleasure, like they want something else out of life, then becoming more happy, achieving greater pleasure, enjoying life more would not make that person's life better if that's not something they desired. Okay, that may seem like an odd case, but Heathwood's point is, what explains the value of something is our desiring it. What explains how or why something makes our life better is the fact that it's something we desire. So what does it mean for our life to go well? What does human welfare consist in for Heathwood? Just the satisfaction of desire. That's his basic thesis. Okay, so that's something you can think about. There are two examples that he gives in the essay that I think are really important for evaluating his thesis. One is the example of Charlie, who gains more freedom. The question is whether in gaining that freedom, Charlie's life is made better, right? Does he achieve greater welfare, or is his life better as a result of gaining that freedom or not? That's the example is there to sort of raise that question. And then he gives the example of the serial killer Ted Bundy and his evil desires to kill people. Here's an example of someone whose desires are being satisfied, but we kind of want to say his life is not going well. He's not living a good life. He's not enjoying well-being, or he's not thriving as a human being because he's a serial killer. This is a problem for Heathwood because he wants to say that human welfare consists in the satisfaction of desires. Well, here we have Ted Bundy satisfying his evil desires, but we want to say he's not thriving as a human being. So, something has to give. So that's another interesting example for Heathwood. Hopefully all of this helps you think about the writing assignments for this week. Please contact me over email if you've got any questions about those. But just coming back real quick before I end the video, here are the assignments. The discussion is due by Friday, and that's the one about the experience machine. And then homework 2 is due by Sunday, and that's the one about Heathwood's faring well and getting what you want. Both of those readings, even if you don't have your books, are down here. There's links to them. The letter to Epicurus is here. I don't have a digital copy of Mill's Hedonism. You do need to get your books next week, but for this week, if you don't have them, you can still do the writing assignments. Okay, and here is the, that's all for now. Hope these were useful. Okay, bye.